Hi, hello. Welcome to Myself on Purpose. I'm the host, Aria, and this is session 5. I can't believe it's already session 5. If you've been here for the ride so far, thanks. If you're new to this, hello and welcome. So this is session 5. Today I will be talking a little bit about confronting people. I was asked to speak a little bit on this topic and share some of my thoughts. Kind of like a piece of advice. I'm going to try something a little bit different, y'all, to be 100% transparent. Like, having a podcast that isn't like interview style, you know what I mean, can go so many different ways. It's a little bit awkward, right? It's like essentially a diary or a monologue, a conversation with myself that I'm hitting record for, and then I'm publishing it out into the world. And folks who know me know, like, I'm a prepared girly. Like, I like to be prepared with shit. I don't like to just come totally unprepared. And so it can be a little bit of a balancing act to figure out, you know, what topics you might touch on while you're recording, what topics you might want to stay away from, gathering your right wording and things like that. Sometimes you run the risk of sounding too scripted, and other times you run the risk of just having so much footage that it's really difficult to make anything come of it that's like cohesive and worth publishing, in my opinion. You know what I mean? So it's been difficult to not sound too scripted, but to trust in my stream of consciousness. But to be honest with you, most of the conversations that I am having, either with myself or, with people who are a part of, my ecosystem, they are stream of consciousness, right? And they're really fucking good. And that's kind of what led to me starting a podcast in the first place. So I need to trust that instinct, and get over the fact that that may mean a little bit more editing on my end. But anyhow, I'm going to try the stream of consciousness approach with this session in particular. So bear with me. I appreciate your patience, as I am like finding my zone in all of this, right? I'm not new to thinking critically or deeply about anything. I'm not new to, expressing myself in this way, but I am new to, pressing record and then sharing that out into the world. So I'm newish to this, and I'm still trying to find my way. So if this is just a little bit more choppy or whatever, that's probably why. It might be some other shit, but that's probably why. Anyhow, enough of that. We can dive into this topic now. So I'll give a little bit of background around how this even came up. A few weeks back, I was watching a documentary, and it was following the stories of some survivors of some pretty traumatic experiences. And it had come to the point in the documentary where there was a particular survivor who was confronting one of her abusers. And the abuser said, that never happened. He gaslit her, and I'll come back to that. And I shared this on my Instagram because it was one of the most perfect examples of a Freudian slip that I had ever witnessed, not admitting any sort of responsibility, and kind of just denying that any of it even happened. And the abuser says, well, I'm driving my car right now and cars are passing me by. My gas light is on, so I have to go. And in the background, you can hear this other survivors. Yeah, it is. Yes, your gaslight is on, right? because the abuser was completely gaslighting this young lady. So let me pause. That's what happened at that moment in the documentary. That was a Freudian slip for folks who don't know. And I was sharing, I was enthusiastic about having witnessed a great example of how this happens. There's a lot of truth in Freudian slips, right? That's essentially what they are. Like the truth comes out when we don't mean it to necessarily. And so for that to happen in this situation where the abuser had just kind of finished denying any fault. It was like perfect timing. It was a perfect example. So anyhow, I shared that on Instagram. And so someone responded and asked to hear my thoughts about reaching out to people we feel gaslit us about something. And so that's the basis of where this is coming from. I want to be very clear on like what gaslighting is. I recognize that this phrase, this terminology has gained a lot of popularity in recent years via social media, and in my humble opinion, there's not been a great deal of clarification around what it is or what it isn't. And it's not coming from people who are subject matter experts. Social media making education accessible is phenomenal. I think we're seeing evidence of that politically. But just as easily as we can be informed, accurately informed via social media about things, we can just as easily be misinformed about things via social media, right? Because it is so accessible. I mean, literally, I'm on a podcast right now. Like anyone could start up a podcast. And I don't claim to be an expert on anything that I'm talking about, right? This is an experience-based podcast. And I'm very upfront about that. But unfortunately, we can't really govern that in spaces like social media. And so things like this can happen, right? Where like a lot of folks are misinformed. So I do want to take a pause, take a beat right here and just talk about gaslighting so that we're clear on what I mean by gaslighting here on this podcast. So I'm going to read from Psychology Today. It says, gaslighting is an insidious form of manipulation and psychological control. Victims of gaslighting are deliberately and systematically fed false information that leads them to question what they know to be true, often about themselves. They may end up doubting their memory, their perception, or even their sanity. Over time, a gaslighter's manipulations can grow more complex and potent, making it increasingly difficult for the victim to see the truth. Okay? Gaslighting. So, to the person who sent me the message about my opinion on confronting someone we feel gaslit us, I think my opinion varies, mostly based on what value it would add for the person on the receiving end of the gaslighting behavior, but also on the emotional intelligence, the EQ of everyone involved. And this kind of goes back to, was it session 3, where I talk about energy budgets for someone on the receiving end of the gaslighting behaviors. I might ask, like, what do you want to gain from confronting them? Do you want an apology? Do you want admittance? Are you still looking for some sort of validation from them that confirms what you yourself know to be true? If so, I think it's a dangerous and disappointing goal to chase, quite frankly. And I'm not sure that you would get it. I also think like wanting those things, right? Admittance, an apology, some sort of validation from them still keeps the other individual's word and perspective at the center, like the center of the focus, instead of your own experience, right? Your own knowledge. I'm saying your as if you are on the receiving end of the gaslighting behavior. And the reason that's dangerous is because, in my opinion, at the root of gaslighting is the issue of getting the survivor to lose trust in themselves, their thoughts, their experiences, their feelings, and what they know to be true, right? That is like what makes, again, in my opinion, that is what makes gaslighting such a dangerous experience. Sometimes all we have is our trust in what we see and how we remember something and how we experience something, right? Like your gut. I don't know if you've ever experienced that, where a situation or a circumstance or even a person was allowed to shift your trust in yourself, like your trust of your judgment, your trust of your understanding of something. It can feel so violating. Not trusting other people, okay, I can deal with that, but not trusting myself. Whew. So I say all that to say, if the reason the person on the receiving end of the gaslighting behavior is trying to chase down any of those things, I think it's a dangerous spot to be. And in that case, my opinion would be that that's the opposite direction of the work that you want to be doing and that you need to be doing, right? Which is trusting yourself again. On the other hand, sometimes you just need to speak your piece. And I get that. I've definitely had my fair share of those moments where it's like, you know what? I don't give a fuck what you got to say. I need to get this out one way or another, right? If there aren't any expectations or hopes attached to it and you just need to speak your piece, and that's really what confronting them, what you want to get from confronting that person, I'd say do it with some parameters, but my opinion would be, yeah, go for it, I was going to skip around the parameters piece, but I guess this might be important. I don't want y'all inboxing me like, girl, why you always leave the cliffhanger? You know what I mean? That is not my intention. Sometimes I know that I'm a deep person and I can go really, really deep with things that most folks feel should just be on the surface, or, keep it simple, right? That's a phrase that we hear a lot. Keep it simple. But another balancing act of like having this podcast is figuring out how deep is too deep. You know what I mean? Into the combo. So anyhow, that was the mini detour. But anyways, getting back to it. If you are the person on the receiving end of the gaslighting behavior and you just need to speak your piece, you don't have any other sorts of hopes or expectations attached to it that you're chasing, then I would recommend, confronting them and speaking their piece, like the John Mayer song, right? Say what you need to say. Like there can be a lot of like liberation and healing and just closure and all of that stuff that comes from simply speaking your piece. I think the safety of this is that there are no expectations attached to it, because when we have expectations, right, we open ourselves up to disappointment, and where that spiral goes, honey, I don't want any of us to have to find out. So so the parameters, I would say, do it with some parameters. Think about if you want to give them the space to respond. Hello. Because you in charge, take your power back, and what that can look like, and then how you can create the environment for things to go the way you need them to go, right? How you can control as much of it as possible. And so those would be kind of the parameters that I would try and think about and incorporate. So yeah, I mean, deeply consider all of the ways that it adds value or doesn't, because I think that there can be a lot that goes into building the courage to do something like confront an abuser, a manipulator, a gaslighter. And it can put the person who was on the receiving end in a not so great place. So I would just weigh out the worth, right? And I know I always go back to like math and logic. Excuse that part of my brain. Like I use it the most often. My profession requires and depends that I do so, right? And so I'm used to working that part of my brain, but sometimes it is math. So I'm thinking about like, what's the return on investment for you reaching out to these people? And so I said the second piece was around considering the emotional intelligence of everyone involved. If you're not familiar with emotional intelligence, there's lots of great literature. One of the books that I was first introduced to, it's called Emotional Intelligence: Why It May Matter More Than IQ, or something like that. But it's by Daniel Goleman. I think that that's a significant consideration. And again, this goes back to how I think about energy and budgeting. I think it's in our best interest to gauge where people are on their journey of emotional intelligence and like self-awareness. Not just to practice gauging that, but to utilize that gauge, right, to make better decisions about where we might be wasting our time and energy. I'm still trying to be diplomatic here, but said differently, some folks don't have any interest in understanding you or where you're coming from, period. And outside of interest, some people just aren't even in a place to receive what it is that you're saying or trying to explain to them. And that's outside of interest, right? One is about desire and one is about capability. You being hurt, you being someone they care about or even love, doesn't change someone's capability to understand or hear you. We want it to sometimes, but it just doesn't. So recognize where people are, whether or not they have the desire or even the capability to understand where you're coming from. And if not, find a different way to heal. Confronting folks is a rough decision to make. I'm not going to pass this on at all as something that's just easy or black and white or any of that. It can be extremely complex. Sit with it. Don't rush the decision. But more than anything, go with your gut. If you are someone who is on that journey or trying to come to a decision around something like this, take care of yourself. I wish you the best on that journey. I hope things turn out how you need them to. Yeah. Thanks for being here and tuning in. I hope that you'll join me again soon. Until next time, whatever you do, do it on purpose.